everyone. Welcome to Spirit Switchboard. I'm your host, Kerrilynn Shellhorn, and you are listening to us live from the United Public Radio Network and the UFO Paranormal Radio Network, 105.3 and 107.7 FM out of New Orleans. Thank you for being here today. I'm just going to get some things rolling. It looks like we're not streaming on Facebook very well today, so I don't know if they can get it. If you are trying to watch Roku, hi Michelle, YouTube, you can pop over to those. You can do it through hi Laura Lee. Laura Lee, maybe you can let me know. It's saying that we're not on Facebook at the moment. So you can pop over onto Roku. If you look for UFO Paranormal Radio, you can find us under that name on the UFO Paranormal Radio on YouTube and Spirit Switchboard on YouTube as well too. Just a few things. I think that's good. Thanks, Cindy. On the network page, so the UFO Paranormal Radio Network and United Public Radio Network on Facebook. Fabulous. Thank you. Hi, James. Thanks for being here today. I knew that you would come today. This is a talk that would be something that interests you. Thanks, Laura Lee. So those of you that are listening or watching, Laura Lee is a fellow UPRN host. She has the Angel Rock on Mondays and the Thing at the Foot of the Bed with her co-host, David Hansel. Hi, Julie. Oh, thank you, Howie. I appreciate that. I had a little sideways moment when it said that we weren't streaming properly. But I'm glad that we are, and it seems like it's worked itself out. So that's all good. I don't have to worry about anything like that then. Hi, Rose. Thank you for being here. Biggest ever believer in the paranormal. That's awesome. I'll try to rein it in a little bit, Howie, so it's not so big. I'm going to bring my guest out. He is a singer-songwriter, artist, poet, author. If I've forgotten any monikers, I'm hoping that he will gently be kind to me in that. It's nice to have you here, Paul Wyld.
Thank you very much for having me. Great to be here.
I was so excited. Music plays such a big part in everybody's world. We connect to music in so many different ways, in all different aspects in our life, highs and lows. And, you know, I struggle when people ask me what's my favorite song or what's my favorite. I'm like, I love it all. Depends on the task, the mood, the people that I'm with. I love it all. And finding our groove with music is so important.
Yes, Jim Morrison would agree with that. Like he once said in an interview that music is a way for people, for artists to connect with other people, especially someone like Jim Morrison, who was a classic outsider. I mean, he spent much of his life before the doors, alone with his books and journaling, and just with a few of his close friends. And he saw music, as a way in which, you can reach other people, not feel so alone. Another way for other people, to not feel so alone, and the kind of, feelings and thoughts that you have and what you're expressing in your music.
Mm-hmm. It's more. I loved Howie is part of or owner of the Rift Nation Network, and he has a show called The Orion Effect. Very big into music as well too, and he's just sharing that that Morrison was huge in the paranormal.
Yes, he's the subject about his relationship with the spirit world, with the unseen, is just vast. the place to start would be when he was only 3 years old, when he was on a family road trip in northern New Mexico, when he came upon an accident not far from the Los Alamos National Laboratory, where the Manhattan Project, was at, where they invented the atomic bomb. He came upon these dying native workers, and he said that coming from that accident and stopping, that the souls of those dying native workers, they leaped into his, and that they remained there for the rest of his life, and that he said later on, when he was with the Doors, that was the most significant experience of his life. And after doing my own research and after writing this book, I can completely see why he would feel that way. Just the circumstances surrounding that event in his life it's just even more mysterious. How that whole area in northern New Mexico is a really magical place. Like the light is just absolutely beautiful. There's a reason why artists like Georgia O'Keeffe chose to live in northern New Mexico when they were creating their art, and places like around Santa Fe. There is a place called the Los Alamos Ranch School for Boys that Robert Oppenheimer, the guy that invented the atomic bomb and all that, he went there, and when they were looking for a place to set up the Manhattan Project, they went to that school and they said, listen, we want to do this here. We're going to buy this school, and so that's what they did. And also another student that was at that same school was one of Jim Morrison's favorite writers, William S. Burroughs.
Interesting.
And yes, exactly. And what happened there was the Native Americans in the area, they thought that Los Alamos would only be there temporarily with whatever project they were doing. Like nobody knew what they were up to at that time, right? But it became a permanent installation, and they started to build it. And the Native American workers were employed, around northern New Mexico. They trucked them in to work on building, Los Alamos National Laboratory, where they continued to do work on, constructing, weapons of mass destruction. That's where the thermonuclear weapons were built, on. That's the birthplace of that. And it's remarkable that this happened to Jim Morrison in that particular location.
So do you think that would be fated?
Yes, I've thought a lot about this, and I can only just step back and like the strangeness and the mysteriousness of an incredible synchronicity here.
The synchronicities of it.
Because sure, go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say, just even the way that you found your research material feels like Jim Morrison had a hand in it from the other side and leading you to the right book at the right place at the right store. It was that was fascinating to read too. I came across and how those synchronicities played into the creation of this book.
Yes. Would you just to go back quickly to what I was saying about?
Oh, please. Yeah, sorry.
Sure, no problem. But yeah, I would love. I could write a book about writing this book.
I think you should.
Absolutely. Yeah. So, at the same time that Robert Oppenheimer had convened all the scientists in April 1943 to commence work on the Manhattan Project, that was the same month and year that Sandoz, in Switzerland, who 5 years before then had discovered LSD, and he put it on a shelf and left it there for 5 years, and then went back to it 5 years later and dropped some of it on his hand, and that was the first LSD trip. And that happened the same month in April 1943. And Los Alamos and what happened there, and the discovery of LSD at the same time, both had enormous effects on our culture, right? And Jim Morrison was just at the center of this, with this experience that happened to him when he felt these souls of these natives in the area had leaped into his. And it's just almost as if there was some kind of divine force of saying that was going to put this very spiritual person on a path, to remind us of the beauty that we can lose in life, with weapons of mass destruction.
Yep, and that was something I wrote down, that symbolic death and resurrection.
Yes.
That it plays a part in this story repeatedly. with Jim Morrison and what he was giving us in those concerts. Like, it was group healing, group. When you look at him as a shaman, right? If you looked at it as a shaman, he was having birth and that resurrection, solitude, the use of the LSD, and then moving away from it. Like, he really embraced that and gave it to people in a way that they maybe didn't understand, right? The gift that they were being given in that moment.
That's really complicated. Everyone's reaction back then at Doors concerts. Ray Manzarek asked, one of the concert goers in New York one night, like, what do you think of the Doors? What does the Doors mean to you? And this young person said, freedom. Like, the Doors mean freedom to me. And other people walked away from Doors shows thinking, God, I have no idea what I just saw. I didn't expect that, but I'm going to be thinking about it for days. I liked what I saw, but I have no reference for anything like that. Like, a person seeing someone in the throes of shamanic paroxysms on stage is something very, very new. Like, nothing like that had happened before, right?
But the right people will get it at the right time when they're most needing it. So if they got it in that moment, or 20 years later, or 30 years later, when they have a kid that's a teenager and has found the Doors and reintroduced it to them again, it always will come when it's most ready. And there's some people who aren't meant to wake up. Some people are just meant to play that role really well for everyone else around them.
Yes, it's almost like there's like this institution of opposites that we're not going to get away from, among our duality, that in human communities, around the world. And thinking about him on stage with people's reactions, Jim Morrison, like Bob Dylan is like a in comparison's sake, like Bob Dylan is like a comet, like he keeps coming back around, He's been coming back around now for like a long time, like a comet. But Jim Morrison was like, was like a meteor, and it's someone that just streaks across the sky, and it's absolutely beautiful, and it leaves you wondering and thinking about what you just saw. And I feel like that's the effect of Jim Morrison's life on the people that were fortunate to see the Doors live, and for people who are discovering them. And now discovering the Doors is fantastic, because I became a fan all over again. These past 7 years, 8 years, like there's so much on YouTube that I didn't have, growing up, and there's so much new stuff about his life, so many brand new images, so many very interesting Instagram sites and websites about it, that as I was, I felt called to write this book. This book was like an act of service. I really, to be honest, I felt like something was tapping me on the shoulder. You're on the right path.
When you're reading this book, you can feel that.
And it was a shock to me, because how it started was I moved from Boston back to Los Angeles in 2016, and looking back, I realized I was going through a classic dark night of the soul, and I really wanted to come back to myself. These are things we all go through. You get away from who you are, and then you need to find things that come back. And what did it was a book by Gary Lachman called The Secret Teachers of the Western World. And I didn't know anything about the Western esoteric tradition. I mean, I'd read about the occult throughout my life, but I had never really taken a deep dive. And I was looking, I thought, this is the time in my life to do this. And I was looking for a good text to read, that I could sink, quote unquote, sink my teeth into. And I found Secret Teachers. And the more I began to read it, the more engrossed I became, and the more I came back. It was I was feeling myself coming back. And I kept thinking of Jim Morrison at the same time, and I kept taking notes in the pages going until it became just really compelling. And I was going to and at the same time in Los Angeles, all the 50th anniversaries of the Doors was going on from 1965 to 1971, from 2015 to 2021, right? So we were going to things around town. They created the street where Jim Morrison lived on in Lower Canyon with Pamela. In West Hollywood, they renamed it Love Street.
Oh.
Yeah, and it was really great. We got to go there, and Robert Krieger was doing the band and all that, and Lana Del Rey showed up, and and all that was like, really a lot of fun. So all that was going on, and I just kept, the ball just kept rolling, and then the more I began to read the more I read Secret Teachers, the more I was this is a life transformative book that I'm reading for me personally. I'm sure it's been for other people. And I got in contact with Gary Lackman, and I realized I'd read a book by him many years ago when he was Gary Valentine, when he was with Blondie. And
Right.
that book stuck with me, and I got back in contact with him and said, "Are you Gary Valentine?" He's like, "Yes." So that was really cool.
But
And he's a very
it's the
go ahead.
synchronicities, right? It's the
Yes.
magical and being present in the moment enough to see that these steps are unfolding in front of you, and that brave enough, not needing to know how or where it's going to take you, but just taking the steps and moving with it, right?
Yes. And what exactly? Exactly. And what really did it is that I learned about the Hellenistic mathematician, a lady named Hypatia. And she was a brilliant mathematician who lived in ancient Alexandria, which at the time was Hellenistic Alexandria. And the Parablani, like the really militant Christians there at the time, they put her to death for all kinds of reasons. One of them being, being involved in gnosis, and they just felt that her teachings were heretical. She was a really super brilliant person. So I found a movie that was made about her called Agora, in which the actress Rachel Weisz plays her. It's a very good film. And at the end of the film, when she's executed, this is the first film that made me cry, that made me bawl. And I never, cried at a film in my life. And that's when I knew that something had gotten to me. Because you can learn a lot about yourself by when you have such strong reactions to something, right? And
Mhm.
so that's when I told myself, hey, like if this is happening, you're getting back to you, and this is good. And
Mhm.
that's what led me to learn more and more about the Western esoteric tradition. And as far as Jim Morrison goes, with Secret Teachers, the lights just came on. Like
Yeah.
suddenly, I mean, we all know that Jim Morrison he was more than a rock star. We can't quite understand why. And I feel like with Secret Teachers, with learning about all the secret teachers of the past and everything that the rejected knowledge, has gone through ever since, ancient Alexandria, that I'm like, oh, okay, this is who Jim Morrison is. This is what he's been trying to do, because his life, the events of his life, the patterns fit what have happened to many people like him, in the past, many hundreds of years, like Hypatia, and like
Mhm.
Giordano Bruno, who was also, executed, for going around telling people in the days after the Italian Renaissance that there is extra dimensional reality. It's not just this reality, and the church is just the Catholic Church is like having none of that, right? And
Right.
they did,
And sorry.
No, go ahead, go ahead.
Or just like with Jim Morrison, that was the discovery, like going within, so like more than his human self, and then showing up that way, knowing that it's contributing to the collective consciousness, not just to, this realm and this moment, that everything we're doing is, being contributed to something even bigger than us, that we are constantly evolving past being human. And being able to share that through his writing and music and movement, again, comes back to being like such a gift. There's the comments I want to. There's a lot of comments that I'm going to pull up. I
Yeah,
just want to not get lost, or I don't want people to feel that we're not paying attention to them. Howie is sharing not to jump ahead. He even walked the same walk Jesus did in the desert. He claims, and writings in his book of poems was so powerful. Um, his insight into demonology, into spiritual, was so bright and intense.
hmm yes, it was. When he was in high school, he was checking out books on 14th and 15th century demonology from the Library of Congress. I mean, he was just. I think Jim Morrison was his spiritual awakening, like really started to bloom when he was just 13 years old, because all the behavior that he exhibits in high school, as we learn, and no one here gets out alive, it fits the descriptions of a person in a spiritual awakening, as Christina and Stanley Groff write about in their remarkable book, The Stormy Search for the Self.
Mm.
And in that book, I found a lens to look at what was happening with Jim Morrison as a teenager. I mean, he just exhibits everything of a person who is their consciousness is ascending. He finds a book called The History of Magic and the Occult, in a local Alexandria library that he never returns. And I think that book really helped him to orient himself into what was happening with him. There wasn't much you can find back then in the late 50s and early 1960s. He was on his own with what he was doing, and he was definitely he was searching. He was going to all of the bookstores all over Washington D.C. and Alexandria, Virginia, like the very bohemian bookstores, to find anything that he could read that would tell him about, I think, what was going on with him.
So I was just gonna. That was a thought that I had and a note that I had written too. Like if we believe in reincarnation, we've had all these different lives. We've been, had many different religions. So looking at different concepts and theories and religions is important in order for us to evolve past, where we're at in this lifetime.
Yes, that's so. With reincarnation and those things, like I chose the opening title. This is the strangest life I've ever known, which he says at the end of the song, "Waiting for the Sun." And Jim Morrison, when he was a kid, he really admired and loved Alexander the Great. And Alexander the Great was the one who founded the city of Alexandria, and his goal with that was to create a city, a great place of learning, because he was influenced by Aristotle, who was his teacher. And Aristotle taught him as a boy that all human beings have a very deep desire to know. And it's really important that we foster, this innate curiosity that we have, because it makes us alive, right?
Yeah.
It puts us in touch with that other reality. That's why I chose that quote at the beginning of the book, from Jim Morrison's poetry: "Reality is what has been concealed from us for so long." There's just no better line of poetry to just says it all about what we're going through, what we're trying to get back to, right?
Yeah.
So Alexander founds this city, and he was upset at the time because there were no worlds left to conquer. He was in his 32 years old. The only thing left was to rediscover that other reality that Aristotle had alluded to. And that the great library was founded there, where that gave birth to the Western esoteric tradition. And that's the place where Jim Morrison would have felt right at home among all those people, because that's who he was.
Yeah.
And it's almost as if at this time, right before the 1960s, that Jim Morrison, his way, was picking up where Alexander the Great had left off. It's almost as if like the evolutionary work, so to speak, that began there, it was being pulled forward by people like Jim Morrison at this point in history. It's an absolutely breathtaking, remarkable story when you start looking at Jim Morrison's life in relationship with the Western esoteric tradition. That's what just blew my mind.
Well, so I know Howie had asked the question. I'll hold up the book. The official release date is the 10th, correct? September 10th is the official.
This Tuesday.
Yeah, the official release. And if you, so for the audio listeners, because we do have more audio than visual, it is Jim Morrison's Secret Teacher of the Occult: A Journey to the Other Side, Paul Wyld, paulwyld.com, Amazon, where else? Barnes & Noble,
Amazon, like BAM, and
Inner Traditions website as well too.
Yes, Simon and Schuster.
Yeah. So this is it, Howie. And yes, you would really like it, Howie, because you take like those concepts and then your research is intense. How long did it take for you to do this?
So
what was the process because you take from the books and then add in Jim Morrison and put these connections together, and it's weaved together so beautifully.
Thank you.
But it's a lot.
Yes, well, Jim Morrison, like I approach him just like I would approach any great poet or artist, because that's who he was. Jim, this is somebody who had an IQ of like 149. By the time he's 17 years old, he has over 1,000 books in his room. When he graduates high school, he doesn't want a car, he doesn't want a trip to Europe. He asks his parents for the full set, the full volume of Friedrich Nietzsche's books. Like, this is a
Right.
person who is, very much, all the signs of someone who, whether he consciously maybe knew it or not, well, he did feel when he was young that he was called to do something. And I think he was unconsciously, following that path of learning. And that's where he was going with all of this. So my goal was to be as specific as possible to show that he's a secret teacher in the Western esoteric tradition, and not just a secret teacher, but one of its great ones. And it was, I really had to discipline myself, to stick with that. And I began writing. Well, I got the idea in the fall of 2019. I even screenshot it on my phone. It's at 11:11 a.m. on November 11th at a cafe in Sebastopol.
I just got goosebumps.
Yeah, I have to put that up on my website, I think. And
Yes.
so, and then I was taking notes and was percolating in my mind. And then when the pandemic hit in March, the day that Trump declared the national emergency, I was like, well, I'm a musician, everything's shut down. There's no place to play, nothing to do. I guess I need to just start writing. And so that's where it began. And that was to be writing all of this and I'm going through my own spiritual awakening at this time, and going to like what I learned is rapid spiritual awakening. And at the same time, I'm writing this book, and all these things are going around me, all around Sonoma County, and the whole world's in lockdown, and there's riots, and there's all these things going on. It was intense. It was something else.
Yeah.
And then on one morning in April, I think it was 10th to the 14th, I can't remember which day the pandemic was, the national emergency ended. But I woke up that morning, I was writing, I was like, that's it, I can't write anything more about this. And then about an hour later, I saw that Biden signed into law ending the national emergency with the pandemic, and I was like, wow, that's
Some
it
weird
was,
synchronicity.
yes, emergency, like, to emerge. I mean, that's
Yeah.
what spiritual awakening is, right? It's like it in
Yeah.
its way, it's kind of like a spiritual emergency, and I think that's what everybody, many people were going through during the pandemic, because we all had to do what Jim Morrison did. We all had to turn inward for a while.
And
You
it's
know,
uncomfortable. So those people who are not able to look at those places that are uncomfortable are the ones that stay sort of sleeping through this,
yes,
right? And
yes.
and they
Well,
all have their place. They all have a place
mhm.
and an anchor in the story.
Well, I think
But
when you talk about, like, there's the element in culture for people that are just not awake. I I brought up the play, Shakespeare's play Hamlet,
Hamlet, yeah,
and Hamlet, that play predates modern man by 300 years, because we are all waking up to the spirit world in which Hamlet did. And aside from him discovering that his mother and his uncle were got together and plotted his father's murder to gain power, he discovered the spirit world, and it excited him, and it shook him out of his grief, it shook him out of his depression. And he went to his friend Horatio. He said, my God, like, there's more, the famous statement, there's more things in this world that are dreamt of in your philosophy. And he tells him we need to give it a welcome. that that is a central attitude of all of us here 300 years later. We are all giving it a welcome, and there's a difference between us who decided to give it a welcome,
mhm,
this other reality, our connection to the spirit world, our connection to our own divinity, our willingness to find this new kind of alignment as we go into, like, the integral structure of consciousness, the Aquarian age, the age of Horus, and whatever the way you look at it. That
yeah,
that is enormous. That Shakespeare was able to write that play and say that. It was, I mean,
yeah,
Hamlet was put on production at the same year that Giordano Bruno was executed in 1600 for doing the exact same thing in life that Hamlet was going through. I mean, the play, the king, the famous statement, "Madness and great ones must not unwatched go." And that's the exact attitude that the American establishment took towards Jim Morrison with his frequent arrests and its flamboyant rebellion. Like, his madness, we have to keep an eye on it. His father was becoming a rear admiral after being a captain of an aircraft carrier, and he went to the Navy, and he said, look, and the Navy was grooming him to be a very big person, like in the Joint Chiefs of Staff and all of this.
right.
And He went to the Navy and said, "Listen, I'll give you my resignation over my son's behavior and what he's doing out there in society." That's a big, big deal. So, to go back to Hamlet, we're all giving it a welcome, and some people are not giving it a welcome. And even though this great, beautiful awakening is becoming really intense around the world right now, like it's really absolutely amazing. We also have to be aware that there's something also out there, like in the '60s, that wants to harness that wants to contain that wants to control that. They can't stop it, which is what I think they're doing in the '60s when like Nixon
Right.
was president. But now they're trying to do something else. They're trying to hijack it from us.
Well, and the way that we share information now is so much faster and easier. But at the end of the book, you also say, like, it's the disconnect, and it's also in the solitude where we're going to go within. So, disconnecting from AI, disconnecting from, our smartphones, and taking time to be on a trail. And I loved it. There was that snippet that where you said follow your north node, and I'm like, oh dude, you just added astrology into the whole mix as well
Oh yeah.
too,
Oh
and
yes.
it's just so much a part of it, right? And
Well, Jim
which was funny
Morrison's.
because my north node's in my 8th house, which is in Aquarius, and all about the intuitive side, right? So right where I'm meant to be at this point in time, and celebrating all of that. There's
Beautiful.
again where I want to catch up with some of these comments. My sweet friend from Washington, James, is asking, do you think Jim Morrison was reincarnated from a time in Alexandria?
That's I have thought about that, and that's a really big possibility. It's a big possibility that he might have been Alexander the Great, come back in this time to follow what Alexander wanted to do or
Mm-hmm.
could not do, after he had conquered basically most of the known world back then. Alexander the Great he's a very interesting person. Philip II of Macedon was his father, and Jim Morrison's father was also a great military leader. He was commanding his own
Interesting.
aircraft carrier at the Gulf of Tonkin incident, which started the Vietnam War. And that's extraordinary. Jim Morrison called his father the commander, when he grew up. Like he had quite a respect, for his dad in his own way growing up. He could see that, like going to visit one of Jim Morrison's homes was by the Alameda Naval Station, and I was walking around the old aircraft carriers in World War II, like the USS Hornet, which launched the Doolittle's raid on Tokyo, and I thought about what it must be like to have a father who's commanding an aircraft carrier, 3,000 people, and how that would look. And at the same time, you're someone you respect that, but you're completely different, and you see how different you are. And the Morrison family has a very long tradition of service, to the American military and the Navy. And Jim Morrison was not going to go into the Navy, and his father saw that. His father saw that he didn't have any interest in this. He was artistic. He was going another way. His father, in his own way, did honor that. So there's a relationship between Jim Morrison and Alexander the Great this way. I mean, the way that Jim Morrison looked physically. I mean, he was channeling energy from a time in which the statues that were created back then, he actually looked like that.
Mm-hmm.
And he actually was the kind of people that inhabited Alexandria back then, who were there to be a part of the Great Library. These people who were Hermetists, and they were studying ancient Egyptian religion. I mean, Greece was a great civilization, but all of Greece's great philosophers and secret teachers, they all made it a point to go visit Egypt. I mean, that's the land where the Western esoteric tradition was born.
Yeah.
Um, Alexander the Great. I mean, all the cities in Egypt, they're built on the Nile, and Alexandria is the only one that was built on the coast. It was a novel undertaking at the time. So I think it's possible that Jim Morrison may have been Alexander the Great, or it may have been one of those secret teachers um, back in Alexandria. Now this is a really, really great question, because it brings up something really important, called Faculty X, something that Colin Wilson wrote about. And when he discovered this idea for himself in 1966, when he was writing in Washington State, the Faculty X is like the ability to feel and be in touch with different times and different places in history, where you suddenly feel like you're there, like you're going down a time pocket.
Right.
And I think for Jim Morrison, he experienced this, a lot. And when he was transforming, into the Jim Morrison that we know popularly, like the real, lithe and sexy Lizard King in Venice Beach. I think living out there in Venice Beach by the ocean and what he was doing and getting back in touch with himself and opening himself up to the spirit world, and he was starting to write songs, and that shamanic impulse was really starting to have a grip on his path. I think that was something that was a lot like how the secret teachers in Alexandria, lived when they walked the beaches around Alexandria, like what they were experiencing.
Yeah.
And I think Jim Morrison is like Faculty X incarnated, because he's with him. When you're around him, you're channeling you're feeling all of this energy come through him from very, very old times and places. That's why he chose the whole persona of the Lizard King, with his leather pants. It's like, the scales of a lizard, because it's very, very old,
But that's still part of like being a shaman, having those power animals and his connection to snakes and lizards, right? Like that's
Yes.
his spirit animal. And again, just adopting those different aspects of being a leader, and how he's going to present that to his people. And his people
Yes.
are the people that were at the concerts and listening to his music, whether they were aware this is what's happening or not. But
I mean, back then, so like the 60s was like the first popular occult awakening. It's the first time in all of world history that so many people were opening themselves. They were giving it a welcome to everything that was occult and esoteric and spiritual and mystical. And Gary Lackman in Secret Teachers has a great phrase called that people are opening up to that which is new and alien and other. And Jim Morrison was that. I mean, everyone was ready for someone like Jim Morrison, and he embodies like the celebration of coming back to that spirit of what people were doing in ancient Alexandria.
And really getting to the core of who you are and understanding the layers of it and showing up that way.
Yes.
Like, and presenting that way, not hiding aspects of who they are, just really embracing it and putting it out there.
Right, and exactly. And what was just so, his question is really great about reincarnation, because that just brings like, up so much about who he was in this way, is that when in looking at Jim Morrison, one way to really understand him is that this was someone who was very private. They wrote poetry, and they wrote in their journals, and they loved to read, and they were a scholar. He could have been a sociology professor, or someone like that. But he has that Leo North Node, and Leo North Node people, they're pushed to find their fulfillment by being out there in the front. He also is a life path. He's also is a life path 1, and life path 1 people are just they're extraordinary this way. They have to be in front.
Yeah.
Somebody has a dog.
Yeah, 2 of them.
I love dogs.
2 of them, Bruce and Nora.
So for Jim Morrison to to fulfill his calling, you have to go from being this very private person for most of your entire life to suddenly revealing yourself, on stage, in public, and letting him to what I called in the book, like in his own magical kingdom. And just the will to open up like that is very, very generous. I mean, that's making yourself really, really vulnerable. And in that he's a hero. And through this conversation, I don't know if a lot of your viewers that have seen the movie by Oliver Stone, The Doors, and they're thinking about that. Do away with that film, because that's Oliver Stone living his rock star dreams vicariously in that movie.
Right.
I became friends with Bill Cosgrave, who lived with Jim Morrison for 2 years. He wrote a great book called Jim Morrison, Mary and Me. And Mary Werbelow was his college girlfriend, and she said that movie is only about 30% of Jim Morrison. The other 70% is completely missing. Jim Morrison did not meet Pamela Curson on the bridges that on the canals in Venice Beach. Jim Morrison did not throw her into a closet door and light the closet door on fire and leave the house for her to burn or something like that. Jim Morrison did not, quit film school as it showed in the movie. He graduated with his degree in cinematography. That's what he went there to study. Also, he has in the movie, Jim Morrison saying, taking a swig of a liquor bottle, saying like, I'm a fake hero, like, a joke that the gods played on me. That is just ridiculous. Jim Morrison was a great hero.
So Howie is needing to leave. There's other comments Howie has made. Howie would like to connect with you. So we will make this happen so that, because Howie would love to, I'm sure, have you on his show, which is the
I'd be delighted.
Yeah, and he can pick your brain because he is losing it in this conversation. I'm sorry that you have to go and get ready to help the people on the Rift Nation Network, but I'm glad that you do so much. You support everybody so much, Howie, and I'm so grateful that we have connected and become friends and that you participated today.
Thank you, Howie, for your enthusiasm.
Much of it. He asked 2 questions. Okay. He said, I'll say it again, Jeff Martin is Jim Morrison. That's not the question. Oh my goodness, I think I didn't highlight it, so I might have lost it. Thanks for being patient.
Sure. Howie had a second question.
Mm-hmm. I would agree, when you write poetry and put your intention into word, you lose yourself here and journey into your words. I believe Jim did that often. There, I found it. How did he feel about Ian singing for the band in the late 90s?
How do I feel about that, or how did Ian feel about that? That's a great question. I actually was fortunate to see the 21st Century Doors in concert in Tucson when Ian Astbury was playing with Ray Manzarek and Robbie Krieger. John Densmore, they all have a falling out, so John Densmore doesn't to this day join Doors stuff when other Doors are around. It's very intense. This was in 2000, and Ian Astbury started the show that night. He said, like, the gloves are coming off, So I included Ian Astbury's comments in the book because they tied in with what I was learning about. Spiritual awakening is electricity. Henry Miller said that all of the great American writer back in the early 1900s. He said that all writers and artists in the modern era, they're discovering electricity and they just don't know anything about installation. And you realize what he's talking about is everybody's waking up. Everybody is finding that other reality. Everybody's having peak experiences. Like, for instance, what Colin Wilson was talking about in The Outsider. The Outsiders, the book that Jim Morrison read in high school. Like, he was like, why are these great romantics having these great highs and these great lows? It's because peak experiences are absolutely, for people of that caliber, they're extraordinary. Like, you're really in touch with this other reality. And for people that have that secret teacher self who are artistic, they feel compelled to express it because it's powerful. And it's a kind of electricity. And Ian Astbury noticed that, he, from touring with the Doors, he said that he was, out there in front, like a part of that diamond, and being in the center of, with John Densmore drumming behind him, and Ray Manzarek to his right, and Robbie Krieger to his left, and all of like the spiritual energy that's coming through him at the same time, that he could sense like the electricity was powerful. And we have human bodies. There's a potential that you can short circuit, you can burn out. Like, I include in there what Ram Dass said about this too. Like, it's a very high voltage thing going on.
Yeah.
And I think that's one of the reasons why Jim Morrison drank, he told his friend Frank Lasanjo, like, I have to shut the voices up in my mind that are
Yeah.
compelling me to write and create because I need a break.
Yeah.
And I think he really opened up so much that there was just so much electricity there, right?
Yeah. When I always call it coming out of the witchy boo closet, right? Like before I came out, like because I've been able to connect to the other side from the time I was little. So I did hair. I was a hairstylist. I taught dancing from the time I was little. Like I being creative with has always art. My mom was very horrified that I didn't go to school for art because I was always creating art. She thought that's what I should have gone to university and college for. And but you know, you said something that triggered a memory. When I was coming out of this witchy closet, I had connected with an Indigenous shaman, Northern Ontario, Canada, and he said to me, "You need to be very careful about alcohol. You need to be very careful about alcohol." He said, because people like you, when they really are stepping into inspiring and sharing with other people, use it as the out. And I've had times where, and that's exactly what it is because people have asked me about like doing weed or pot or any of those things. I'm like, heck no, I do have some control issues. And if I relax further, I just don't want it. I have enough of it. I'm in that world every day so much. There's just a no. I'll take a drink so that I can fall asleep. And it doesn't even take much, but I just want to tap out. I want to be able to snore loud enough that the neighbors 2 doors down can hear me. I want to sleep that heavy, like tapping out. But I appreciate that. Like,
So
and it
alcohol
is,
with Jim Morrison is like that's a very complicated topic also
it is.
because firstly he's a Dionysian archetype,
Yeah.
and one of the beautiful books that I discovered was Jean Shinoda Boland's Gods in Every Man: Archetypes that Shape Men's Lives, and she even mentions Jim Morrison and Mick Jagger in the chapter on Dionysius as being embodying the Dionysian archetype, especially in the 60s, which was a Dionysian era, right?
Creating
So
chaos.
I've noticed that a part of a trait of when you have this archetype is that you're a mystic. You're a very mystical person. Like I realize I have this archetype, and there's a compulsion to want to to complement and intensify this mystic side of you. This with alcohol, with psychedelics, with drugs, as to celebrate it, to feel it even more, to heighten it, to heighten the sensation. So that's part of what was going on with Jim Morrison with that. Also, he
But
was.
as a
Go
shaman,
ahead.
you extend past it. Like, you know, if you look at shamans, they do this to put themselves in that altered state and have that connection. But through utilizing the tools repeatedly or expanding their knowledge, they grow past needing that,
Hmm.
and are able to access it. Because did he not also, didn't, you know, Jim Morrison move past LSD at one point too? Like, did he not?
Yes, his friend Frank Lasanjo once said that he preferred in the end to just go to the liquor store and be able to buy beer and liquor as opposed to like the whole underworld experience of buying drugs. He felt that
Mhm.
Frank Lasanjo says that Jim Morrison felt that that was beneath him, to
Oh,
engage in that kind of activity, that it was just, it just seemed more in the open, and I don't know how, like, an element of being, more, what's the word for it? More, have more integrity to it, just to go walk to the store and get some beer, alcohol, whatever. Um, but with the psychedelics, I mean, that the LSD is such a huge topic for Jim Morrison also. Like, LSD was legal when he was in Venice Beach and transforming into the Jim Morrison that we know in 1965. You could buy it over the counter. And the
right.
LSD that you bought back then was much more powerful than your average, street dose today, which is about 300 micrograms. And back there was hundreds of micrograms. And Jim Morrison had like a really powerful physical stamina. Like, this is somebody who could do the butterfly stroke with ease. I mean, he had the physical makeup to be a shaman and a rock star. He could do all of this. So he took copious amounts of LSD along with all kinds of other drugs, to break on through to the other side. He was very much affected by a letter that the symbolist, boy poet wrote to one of his teachers. Arthur Rimbaud is this poet. That he believed in that the poet should make himself into a seer, through a prolonged, derangement of the senses. The prolonged being the key word, right?
Mhm.
And so that's what Jim Morrison did in typical Jim Morrison fashion. He tested it all right to the limits. Like he'd see just how far that he could go with tampering with his blood pressure and his mind, and all kinds of stuff that he was doing in conjunction with these copious amounts of LSD. And this is going to do something to your mind. He writes in his poetry that drugs are a bet with your mind. That's true. Just with Jim Morrison, everything is like a stunt. Everything is like, if I take it to this far, like where can this lead? Maybe even death. Who knows? But it's the exploration and the sensation, where you're going, that journey to the other side that he was most interested in. But to go back to alcohol, that's like the classic, drink, for writers. And in the end, Jim Morrison was a writer. He was a poet. And back then, that's just what writers and poets preferred. Going back to like, Hemingway and all those other people, they all drank.
My oldest son has a strong love of Hemingway, and he writes poetry and art and photography, and he does all of these things. Beautiful. And does the same thing, right? He's like, shows me this little glass of whiskey when he was first starting, right? But again, has moved past it, having those experiences with paranormal and dimensional and bigger experiences in that collective consciousness and connection and awareness and moving past certain things.
I mean, alcohol is certainly much a part of like the entire, Dionysian cult, right? Bacchanal and everything like that. But it also really dulls the mind.
It does.
And a lot of people were, they were very concerned that the more Jim Morrison drank, like the more like his mind, this incredible mind that he had, was just being blunted.
Yeah.
And I think partly why he wanted to go to Paris was to dry out, to stop the drinking. Unfortunately, that didn't happen. He was there for a variety of reasons.
Contessa is just sharing. Contessa, thank you for being here. Contessa is sharing, it puts you in that vulnerable state to receive information. Sorry, I needed to finish that. I wrote this down as well too, the shaman scapegoat. The Lord's heroes who live for us and whom we punish. Taking on that role for people. Could you kind of dig into that with us?
I'm not quite following that. The shaman is scapegoat?
So using a shaman, like this, the shaman would push themselves to those limits, right? In order to understand, in order to teach. But then, for him, he was punished for pushing that envelope and still, trying to present. So, those heroes who live for us and whom we punish.
So in Jim Morrison's time in the 60s, that was a time where, he has, in his relationship with other secret teachers like Giordano Bruno and Hypatia, there's just enough going on in the culture that, a band like the Doors can succeed, that someone like Jim Morrison can be loved and appreciated, and, there's commercial success and all of that. But when it comes down to it, the Nixon administration and the Christian right that puts them into power, the conservative elements that puts them into power, that part of America, they just were not going to have, this young man looking the way he looks, acting the way he's acting on stage, waking people up to cosmic consciousness in connection with the spirit realm and getting in touch with their divine light and following their own path and all of this and being that popular. They saw that as a downright satanic threat. And in Miami, they saw their chance to get him into court, in which they falsely charged him, with exposing himself to the audience that night, which he did not. Robert Krieger in Set the Night on Fire, he said that the charge that was dropped in that case was the public drunkenness charge. That's what he should have been charged with because he was drunk. But he did not expose himself. None of the doors saw it. None of the roadies saw it. There were no witnesses that came to the trial to saw it. Yet they charged him with that anyway. And he was convicted, and then he was sentenced to 6 months of hard labor. And they told him that more than likely this is going to be the most notorious violent prison in Florida, which is Rayford Prison. And so when he was out on appeal, he was on bond, and well, he's pending his appeal. He went to Paris, and he kept telling his friends and people, like, I want to make sure that they're not going to send me to Rayford Prison. So you're Jim Morrison, and you're in Paris, and you're trying to get back to yourself and all this, but through your mind you're saying to yourself, and Jim Morrison's very smart. He's very aware that, number one, his flamboyant rebellion, okay, it could draw the ire of the U.S. government because of his father in the Navy and how public that is. And two, Jim Morrison is very aware of how people like him in the past, other secret teachers, how governments have come against them and silenced them and even executed them. He's very aware of all of this. So you're in Paris, and your lawyers are telling you that you're going to get off on appeal, but there's a very strong chance that this case is going to get thrown out because it's a ridiculous case, and it was. But I'm sure Jim Morrison must have been telling himself, but I've already been convicted. Like they have already nailed me for something that I didn't do. So if I go back, what's going to happen to me if I lose the appeal? Well, that means they're going to send me, they're going to put me in the inter-county paddy wagon and take me to Rayford Prison, and there I might not make it out. When he was in Paris, he was actually staying in the same room when Pam and him were waiting to move into their apartment in the 4th arrondissement, not pronouncing that correctly, arrondissement, in the Marais in Paris. They lived in a room where Oscar Wilde, the English writer and poet, had died. And he came to Paris after spending 2 long, hard years in a prison in England. He was put in there for on violating moral grounds, a bunch of garbage, and he never recovered. So I thought that was Jim Morrison must have thought about that. So I think, I don't know for sure, when we can only go by some facts that point to something that's really questionable and very mysterious. And is that on March? So the concert takes place on March 1st, 1969, at the Dinner Key Auditorium in Miami, Florida. That's where he supposedly exposes himself. And then on March 5th, that's when the arrest warrants are issued in Miami. And at the same day, the FBI office in Miami sends their own description of what happened at the concert directly to J. Edgar Hoover's office in the FBI building in Washington, D.C. And Jim Morrison had an 80-page file. I don't know if he knew that or not in his life, but they had his eye on him. An 80-page file, that's that's big. And James, Nixon is go ahead.
James was just sharing he was also arrested for inciting a riot at one of his concerts.
Yes, Jim Morrison was familiar with a book by Elias Kennedy called Crowds and Power. And I don't think anybody knows for sure if Jim Morrison's intention was to incite riots at concerts. I think he was probably interested in that because Jim Morrison was not a person who wanted people to be suffering from violence. He did not want, like what happened at the Who concert, in the 1960s where people died and all that. Jim Morrison didn't want anything like that, I think he was those riots started because there was just a tremendous, electrical energy, a tremendous electrical spiritual energy going through that crowd that, a lot of young people, it's completely new. It's almost like the precursor of the mosh pit, right? It's kind of like that. And you have to put this into context. Like when we talk about, riots at concerts, like what went on back then is like, pretty run of the mill for a lot of like punk rock concerts that happened in the 70s, 80s, and 90s since, and we don't make anything of it. But at a door show, since it was brand new, it's there in history, and everyone thinks that Jim Morrison was this person that just incited people to create mayhem in the audience and and hurt each other and all that. And that's not the case.
And really not what it isn't the intention when it's about going in and expanding consciousness, right? And how that's sort of in the background for him when he's producing this, right? Joe, Joe Montaldo. Hello, Joe. Thanks for hanging out. So Joe is the owner of our network.
Oh, great.
Yes.
These questions are fantastic.
Good. He's just saying he's liking it. Thanks for being here, Joe. Okay. I had so many little notes. I'm not even, unless you have a specific place that you would like to take us to next.
Oh, it's your show. I'm loving where we're going.
Okay, super. Okay. Oh, I think we've hit so many of them. Oh, about the responsibility about healing and sharing. So like, and expanding. So that responsibility or personal responsibility. So him taking that ownership and again, so digging deep within and expanding. But you also seem to do the same thing when you were doing that research. You had this healing aspects that happened when you were doing your research, and you know who you were when you first started, who you are now afterwards, are a different person. And I think that we all have that experience, like when we hit that very low and then we start to go in, we don't even recognize that person anymore. We're not at that same vibrational place. We can hold gratitude for them, but we're not them anymore, right? The burdens that they carried. But how he definitely and I feel too, just like maybe I don't know, you can tell me how you felt with this. Once you reach a certain level of vibration, there is this strong need to share and
Yes.
and inspire and teach. Can you discuss?
Sure. Yeah, fantastic. I think we all enter these times in our lives when it's dark and we start to search, and that's when like the beautiful things can happen, because that's when the light comes in. Jim Morrison has a line in the beginning of the collected works of Jim Morrison, that man can assist in the salvation of light, and that's when we are reaching to find ourselves again, to come back to alignment. Like we're not only finding the light for ourselves, but we're bringing light to other people. This is all about co-creating.
It is in every moment.
Yes, like I didn't. These are terms and things that like I never really understood or ever thought I'd ever be saying, like this in a podcast like this or anything like that. It's all very surprising to me. It's really beautiful. But once I was starting to learn about what alignment means when I was writing.
Okay.
And part of as far as the healing aspect, I think one thing that Jim Morrison, a lot of people, is that this is someone who worked to move away from a family life, a situation, and also out there in the world. He once said, like, the collective archetype is getting me down. Like, he had to really find a way to be himself, and that's what we're all doing. We're all trying to find a way to be ourselves while we take care of all of our required tasks in life, and we have to, deal with everything that's going on, in the world out there at the same time, right? And part of that is the healing. And one day, and I think it was in 2020, in the summer of 2020, like I really asked for the universe for a way to forgive. Like I think forgiveness is a really big part of life, and you have to be able to do that to free up your energy to move on, right? Anger only takes you so far. And next day I found that book. I found Gene Shinoda Bolen's Gods in Every Man in a park bench. And I just picked it up, and it was all tattered, and I started to read through it, and like, my God, this book is absolutely incredible. And excuse me. In the beginning, she says that she wrote this book so men can be able to heal. And I was like, wow, like, what a gift. I actually got in touch with Jean Bolen, and I got back an amazing email from her.
Oh, that's
I was very fortunate. I was able, because of the technology available to us today, I was able to get on Facebook and just email Gary Lackman and Jean Bolen and James Roy and all these people, and to my absolute delight, they were very supportive. They were very patient. I like, my gosh, like I just generally feel like the universe is like, yes, we'd like you to do this. We're going to help you to do this.
Yeah.
Like the angelic realm is very real.
Yes.
And suddenly my number synchronicities, start to skyrocket, as well. That's why I started off the book with 1717. My editor asked me to write something personal about this journey.
Yeah.
And I kept seeing this house number, 1717, when I was walking to this particular cafe in Santa Rosa to start writing. And at this point, I'm far enough along on my journey to know that when I start noticing another number that keeps popping up that way, it has meaning.
Mhm.
Some part of my mind knows this, even though my conscious mind doesn't know it yet. But that vital part of yourself knows it, and
Yeah.
at some point you're gonna know why. And I did. Like I asked the universe, like, please show me a sign that I'm not wasting my time writing this book, because I'm putting a lot of energy into this. Then I got this book by Frank Lasanja called Friends Gathered Together, and I saw a picture of where Jim Morrison lived at Alameda. He lived at 1717 Alameda Avenue. And I talk about in the beginning there,
You do.
what happened when I got there. And that's why it's a very personal moment in my life. I want to share that.
Yeah.
But that's I put that in there for the readers to realize that, all this kind of thing can occur for anyone if you really ask. Ask and it will be given.
Yes, and being open to, with no expectation, high intention, low attachment. High intention with no expectation on the how it's going to come to you, and being open. So when you're present in this space, understanding you're co-creating. So in a way that you're going to see, hear, feel, and know. This is happening for me, right? And
Hmm.
when you do get into that alignment, when you get knocked off kilter, you know it. You could be manifesting super quick. I'm thinking about something, and look at that. The book just landed on the park bench, right? And then when you
Hmm.
get knocked off kilter, you start to see the things that knock you off. And then if you stay stuck in that, you see how it can expand quickly too. So then you're having to take ownership of, okay, so the stuff
Hmm.
that feels shiny, I'm in charge of too. And
Yes.
that's hard. That's a hard pill to swallow, right? But it
Hmm.
comes back around with forgiveness again. Forgiveness is a hard thing, though. I tell people it's like 4 ways. You give yourself permission to forgive yourself. You give yourself permission to forgive the other person, and then vice versa. And you don't have to know what, directly to that person. It's going to that energy and that higher self, and your higher self talking to their higher self. Because
Right.
sometimes you can't have rational conversations with the sleepwalkers.
Yes. This calls to mind the actress. I forget her name. She's fantastic. She said that, forgiveness is just like giving up all hope for a better past, right?
Mhm.
So, um, when we're talking about forgiveness in relation with Jim Morrison, like, so I have this Dionysian archetype. I realized, because I saw myself in this. So did Jim Morrison, and the Dionysian archetype has a very hard time in modern society. And I think when Jim Morrison described some of his relationship with his parents and how they really couldn't understand him, I could, like, wow, I went through this too. And I think a lot of people who have the Dionysian archetype, men and women, they can relate to this. They can see that,
Mhm.
maybe, perhaps things were done to them and things were said to them because they were just misunderstood, even though it was hurtful. You read something like God's in every man, you can understand why, and being able to understand why, it goes a long way to just being able to let it go, you know, to do that. And that's what Jim Morrison is trying to do in this song, Soul Kitchen. Like, he keeps repeating over and over again, learn to forget, learn to forget. That song is beautiful because he wrote that song when he used to go to this place called Olivia's Place. It's a soul food restaurant, Venice Beach at the time, and it was run by Olivia, this wonderful African American lady that really liked Jim Morrison a lot, and he got healing energy there. I think through this lady he kind of came in touch with the Great Mother, and because Jim Morrison didn't exactly have a very good relationship, with his own mother. His mother, married an aircraft carrier captain, a military man. I don't think it must have been very difficult, for his mother to understand his son and vice versa, right?
But
So
there's
Jim, Mo-
drive and focus that he would have gained, like that very driven personality. He still had a very driven personality, whether he's,
yes,
consciously aware that he got some of those characteristics and traits from his father or not, it played an important role.
It definitely, yes, yeah, absolutely. John Densmore said that whether, Jim Morrison liked or not, in some ways he was like his dad.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, he was the leader of that band. He was a leader like his father, but a very different kind of leader. He was a spiritual leader. He was a secret teacher on a mission to, through his music and his personality and this really brilliant idea to through rock and roll music to wake us up and to show this other reality. He took that very seriously. He felt like I'm just not a rock and roll entertainer. I'm not in this just to make lots of money and do lots of drugs and have sex with lots of women and buy big houses and cars. I'm not in it for this. I'm in it to do something. I'm in it to make great art and to leave something really healing and wonderful and beautiful for people for all of eternity. That's who Jim Morrison was.
But that's a shaman. That is somebody who is understanding they need to show up authentically with integrity. And
like he said, he said that he put himself out there. He said that the statement I chose, that he said, "I gave you the best of me, even though it might have been in pieces. I did give you the best of me." That's true. He did.
And the higher we start vibrating, we start to move away from people that are not moving at the same pace. And those people are always going to act like a hurt dog, snap, growl, bite, because they don't recognize that same vibration and they're in fear mode. And that's what people in fear do, right? They lash out. So there's I want to get caught up. And I need to, just in case Joe is still listening, I need to make sure I do my station ID because I missed the top of the hour. So
gotta do that.
We are going to do that right now. So if you are just joining us now, thank you for being here. You are listening to Spirit Switchboard. I am your host, Kerrilynn Shellhorn, and you are listening to us live on the United Public Radio Network and the UFO Paranormal Radio Network, 105.3 and 107.7 FM out of beautiful New Orleans. Today's guest is Paul Wyld, and we are talking about his book, which has its release on Tuesday, September 10th is the official release. Jim Morrison, Secret Teacher of the Occult, A Journey to the Other Side. This has been a fascinating conversation. I'm so grateful that you're here. And my beautiful friend, Deborah Morse, who is in California as well. Teacher, lawyer, medium, she is all of the things, is saying beautiful conversation and hello, exactly. Synchronous with some stuff going on with moi at the moment. Bless you both. Thank you for being here, Deb. Grant Evans, I saw your question. I'm going to pull it up for you. It's come up a number of times. I know that Howie brought it up as well too, and so someone else did. What do you think about Jim Martin from the Tea Party being compared so much, or Jeff Martin from the Tea Party being compared so much to Morrison?
Someone mentioned this. I'm not familiar with Jeff Martin to be able to respond to that intelligently.
I'm not either.
Sounds fascinating, I'm sure.
All those people, it may be something to maybe that's why it's coming up so much. It's an avenue that needs to be explored, right? Michelle, I love your comment. Thanks for being here. The Jim Morrison tuning fork, his message prevailed. But it does go out. Heidi, thank you for being here. And you did such a great job. Thank you for promoting this on Instagram. My spirit was not in alignment with being on social media well this week. I was needing the solitude of
that's a good thing. That's a good thing.
Yeah, I believe so as well too. And it's a weird dynamic, in the demands of social media.
It's a good thing and it's a bad thing. I've noticed that I don't, since the internet came out, I don't read as much, and I had to go back to reading, to be able to do this book. And I was like, wow, I'm reading books again. This is really fantastic, So
yeah,
double-edged sword, all this technology.
It really is a double-edged sword, and there's nothing better than the smell and the feel of the book. Yeah, it's one of my favorite.
It would be absolutely something if Jim Morrison were alive today, and what he would have to say about everything that's going on, because he He loved a book called like the Medium is the Message. Marshall McLuhan. I mean, he read those books, and he would have found books today, like the Age of Surveillance Capitalism, and read those very closely. He would have been absolutely fascinated with the internet and everything that is going on, its effects on the minds and people and communities, and he
And
would be,
repulsed by it at the same time, I'm sure.
in some ways, yes.
You know,
In his poetry, he
for
said that
those of us who
we're
are
ruled by
energetically
TV.
sensitive.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So absolutely, social media, right?
You wrote about, it was one of the things we kind of hit it earlier, so I hope that you feel comfortable coming back around to it.
Sure.
When we were talking about his connection, his paranormal connection. So I had wrote down the New Mexico Highway as well too, but you mentioned one in the book, if you're comfortable sharing with it, that's a little lesser known with Mary, and they went
Yes.
to, if you could
Sure.
share.
That's an extraordinary discovery. So I became friends with Bill Cosgrove. I think I mentioned that earlier. He wrote Jim Morrison, Mary and Me. I got in touch with him. A really
Yeah.
wonderful man who's very supportive. And he was in love with Mary Werbelow. But then when he ran to Mary again, she introduced um, Jim to Bill. Jim and Mary met at a party in St. Petersburg, Florida, when Jim Morrison's in Florida in his college years. And Mary Werbelow fell in love with him because he told her that he wanted to go into film and he was creative. And Mary was very bright. Mary's IQ was even greater than Jim Morrison's, and she was even more well-read than Jim Morrison. Like Jim Morrison really loved Mary Werbelow. She really loved him. That was a beautiful relationship. Jim Morrison wrote The Crystal Ship on the first album. That's all about Mary. And the end is the song "The End" is inspired by their breakup, which is very painful. So I think to put this whole experience that they had in that church in Florida in context, we need to go back to his high school years for just a moment. There was
Yes,
something
please.
there was something in his high school years that Jim Morrison he didn't feel comfortable sharing with his parents or sharing with Tanya Martin, his first girlfriend. But Tanya Martin insisted that he talk about whatever was bothering him with a Presbyterian minister, a local religious leader, and Jim Morrison reluctantly agreed. I think partly that's because people going through spiritual awakenings, they're very, very cautious about who they tell about what's going on with them, because then no one's going to look at them the same again, right? But I'm sure, I'm willing to, I'd stake my life that conversation, part of it was like, these things are happening to me. My consciousness is changing. I'm getting in touch with the spirit world. His parents the Morrisons didn't go to church, it seems. I've not read anything that they were a church-going family, or Jim Morrison went to church on Sunday, or belonged to any denomination, Catholic, Baptist, Presbyterian, whatnot. But that conversation remains a mystery to this day. We can speculate on that. But we do know that Jim Morrison's spiritual awakening was really happening at that time. Judging by the text he was going into, the behaviors that he was exhibiting, it matches what's described in Christina and Stanley Groff's The Storm Research of the Self, which is an excellent book that talks about spiritual awakening. I haven't found anything better. I strongly recommend anybody watching this and you're going through spiritual awakening to read The Storm Research of the Self. So in Florida, when he meets Mary, I don't know how they got on. They must have really intense discussions. They're very bright people. They're spiritual people, obviously. And she decides, I guess, that she felt that Jim Morrison maybe just didn't have a belief in God or whatever. So she takes him to a church. And in this church, she prays and asks, God to show Jim Morrison a sign that he's real, that God is real. And as she's praying, this light begins to show itself in the back of the church, and it gets brighter and brighter and brighter, and to the point where it's like as bright as the sun. And it completely terrifies them. They're terrified. And they run out of that church. And when Bill was talking about this with me, this conversation, he talks about it. I first learned about it in his book. Mary was talking about the experience. They were at Mary's apartment. Jim Morrison was there, and so was Bill Cosgrove. And at the end of the conversation, there was silence, and Mary felt that her prayers were answered, that God had given Jim Morrison a sign that he was real, that light. And Jim Morrison's like, his reaction to it in the book, as Bill writes about it, was, I don't know if it was God or not, but it was definitely real. Like that happened, and that haunted him. It comes
Yeah.
up in his writing. There's statements where he says, "Thank you, O Lord, for the blind white light." Now, I can only say that he's thinking about that experience. And that experience is very much related, as Stanislav Grof writes about in The Stormy Search for the Self, of Saul's conversion, on the way to Damascus, he's blind and he becomes Paul, right? That's why I include in the book that the Michelangelo painting of, like, Saul's journey to Saul of Tarsus when he's going to Damascus and he's blinded by the light. And Jim Morrison in his journals and his notebooks, like, he asked a lot of questions about this. He's like, why is holiness associated with blindness, with light? What is all this? Like, he really dove into asking why. And his typical, very intelligent, like, curious question, which he applied to pretty much everything he was interested in. So this really, really affected him, greatly, I think. And I think in some ways it was just as important an experience as the Indians in New Mexico. Whether Jim Morrison would agree with that or not, I don't know. But you can bet that him and Mary, discussed what happened to them a lot in their relationship, I'm sure.
Yeah. And when you have those experiences, even though you feel for some people, they feel that they've received an answer. For others, I'm the same way. It gives me more questions than it does necessarily an answer. Like, I feel like, okay, so that's another step and I'm willing to move forward, but now I have 5 more questions. Like,
that's good. Hold on to that, because that's just a little sidebar here, that's very, very critical. What separates people like Jim Morrison from cult leaders? The cult leader is someone who thinks that they don't have to ask any more questions. The cult leader is the one who thinks that they have found the top of the mountain and they have found the answer to the question, and other weak people come around that mountain thinking they have the answer and they follow that.
And
Real
they manipulate through fear.
Exactly. The healthy person realizes that I've found this mountain range, but there are greater mountain ranges I see, and those are the bigger questions that go on to more questions like that. It's infinity. It's waking up to the infinite. And so that's the big difference between Charles Manson, who's a Dionysian archetype, who thinks he had the answers, right? Another powerful personality. This is someone that Neil Young tried to get a record deal for. Like, he was really powerful this way. A lot of people don't know that.
Yeah.
The difference between Charles Manson and Jim Morrison, right? Like, the difference between, like, the cult leader and people who are truly awake in a way that they're not out to control others.
So when you have your conversation with Howie, when you land over on the Rift Nation network and you're on the Orion Effect, this is the conversation that you have to make sure that you bring up, because he will deep dive down that.
Great.
Because I mean, even when we talk about the paranormal, there's no expert. There really isn't. There's people who have a lot of experiences, but we don't know all the answers. I don't feel like we get to know all the answers until we die. I feel like we're just going to keep having more questions until we have, transcended the meat suit.
Yes. So that goes to something really, really important, is that when Jim Morrison in high school, when he discovered Kurt Seligman's The History of Magic and the Occult, which is written in the English translation, comes out in 1949, and he finds it at a local library in Alexandria, where he was the last 2 years of his high school years. Kurt Seligman chose as the opening statement a quote from Albert Einstein, that the fairest thing that we can experience is the mysterious. Mm-hmm. And in that is where we have our humility, and that is where we discover the infinite. And that is where we can see something that see, this is when you need Jim Morrison around to write poetry about this, right? It's hard to put it into like regular, like rational language, right? That's why we have poets like Jim Morrison, because Jim Morrison, I think that statement affected him just as much as the opening statement to that book of reptiles that he found, that I quote in the book.
Yeah.
Because Jim Morrison is, the most mysterious thing you can experience in rock music. He was very, very astute in the way that he appropriated his really powerful presence that's mysterious and erotic. He understood this about himself. So out of all so many things that are amazing about this individual, one of them is that, if it wasn't for rock music, he'd have been a painter or a poet, an experimental filmmaker, all that. But the very creative person that Jim Morrison was, he saw this new art form, rock music, and its roots in the primitive, in which he could go on stage and he could introduce drama, like Antonin Artaud, and like the theater of the absurd, and which you can reach the audience and shock the audience, and suddenly you have this person who looks like him. Like Jim Morrison looks like something that comes out of a Hieronymus Bosch painting, like the Garden of Earthly Delights, which is his favorite painting, right?
Yeah.
And he looks something like that, and so he appropriates himself this way, so people can he can use that mysterious, for this higher calling.
Well, he moves them through a journey.
Right. And I think the root of that is that statement that he read when he found that book, because he keeps that book until 1963, when he gives it to his college friend Ed Martin for Christmas. And in my research, after reading Secret Teachers of the Western World, I found that YouTube video where Ed Martin was auctioning off the book that Jim Morrison gave him, The History of Magic and the Occult. And immediately I thought that, the title, like, okay, there's got to be a connection between this book and Secret Teachers. So I found the book and I was reading it, going, wow, like this is another person's version of the Western esoteric tradition. It's one of the earliest written accounts, and it's a very artistic book, because Kurt Seligman was a fantastic artist. He was among the surrealists who emigrated to New York from France to escape World War II and the Nazis. And when they came to New York in the mid 40s, late 40s and 50s, they intermingled with all the local painters, people like Jackson Pollock. So surrealism, started to mingle in with that everything that was mystical, that was American, and you get the birth of abstract expressionism. Jackson Pollock he's expressing a kind of shamanism with his paintings, right?
Yeah.
He's kind of like the Jim Morrison in the painting world. So with the history of magic and the occult, I saw that there was a relationship with Secret Teachers, and I felt, I think the way Secret Teachers has affected me, and the way that Colin Wilson's The Occult affected Gary Lackman when Gary Lackman discovered the occult in New York when he was with Blondie in the mid 70s.
Right.
I feel like that it had the same effect on Jim Morrison when he discovered it and when he read it. It really put him in touch with what the Western esoteric tradition was all about. That there are all these other people throughout history that were striving to put themselves in touch with this other reality, that wanted more of these peak experiences, and that found a way to express themselves, and also to overcome the fear, to tell other people, look, there is another reality that is just as important as what our five senses tell us, and what our rational mind can understand. That's just so great about the Greeks, right? Is they discovered the mind and the rational mind, but they also had a very healthy sense of the irrational in life, and they created Greek tragedy. Nobody know, why does Oedipus end up sleeping with his mother and killing his father? It's a terrible thing, right? So you have the tragic chorus, and they're singing and all this kind of stuff, just to deal with the tragedy, these things that the mind can't grasp, but only through music. And that leads into, I think that leads into going back to New Mexico, when the thing with the Indians, this extraordinary thing that happened to Jim Morrison, that your rational mind can't grasp and understand, but you can with poetry. You can feel it, with poetry, or deal with it, or wherever you want, that way with music and poetry. When he writes, Indians scattered on dawn's highway bleeding, ghosts crowd the young child's fragile eggshell mind. He's a child. They're ghosts. They're crowding his mind.
Yeah.
These Indians scattered on the highways bleeding, and the only way to understand this is through art. That's where Nietzsche comes in. We we wonder about things that are terrible and questionable. We give it a welcome. We invite it. And we celebrate it in the way that the Greeks did. Jim Morrison, this all spoke to him this way.
And creativity is a huge part of our spiritual journey. It's a huge part and people don't realize how they are being creative, or how they, they will say, I'm not creative. I can't paint, or I can't play an instrument. But we're co-creating in every moment, and it's doing the things that bring you joy. So even if it's just swaying in time to the music when you're washing dishes, you're creating in that moment, right?
That's right. That's right. That's right.
It's all those little things. We had talked about something briefly before the show started. We'll just come back to Deb, who is a brilliant writer as well, and poet. Deborah shares, a friend once told me, poet gives you just enough words and you fill in your reality, which is why it's profound.
I like that a lot. That kind of reminds me of Carl Jung with his work. He said that wherever my research took me, I always found the lines of a poet that, expressed what it was that I was discovering. That's powerful.
Mm-hmm. James is saying there's magic in music. We had talked briefly about the step back. You have finished. It is now birthed. This book is now birthed, and that the process that it took you. And did you have a grieving, almost like a grieving period? Like, now it's done, so you kind of have this moment to process all of the emotions and growth, and now you can move into celebrating all of this? Or is it backwards? Is it any of it?
I feel like I know something about postpartum depression.
There's a grieving part, right?
Right. So I'm first I have to say that I'm like really, really humbled that I was able to have this book published. I knew that the ideas that I was coming across were important, and I really wanted to write about this because growing up, Jim Morrison became a hero. Like I said in the beginning paragraph, a guide and a mentor, a hero, because I loved books and I was intellectual. I was a spiritual kid. I was a weird kid, like everybody who loves Jim Morrison. Like, you have someone that we can look up to, we can see, like, we have reference, and you can validate yourself. Jim Morrison helped me to validate me. He's helped many, many people do the same thing.
Yeah.
And I was very mindful of like the cultural, magnitude of the person that I was writing about. And I really wanted to come through. I really wanted to work hard. And the universe is like, okay, you can do this, but you're going to earn it. I wasn't going to be able to write about things until I was at a place intellectually and spiritually at this point along writing, and until that could occur. So right now, when I, from talking about this, and now the book is published, I kind of feel in the way that Colin Wilson felt after he wrote The Occult and was published in 1971. I'm even more mystified by all of these things that I've learned about him and the Western esoteric tradition that ever before. Like I'm even now like more eager to. I have more questions. I have there's more research I want to do. For a time, this was a tremendous amount of spiritual energy. This was like a really big thing that happened, and I had to just distance myself from all things Jim Morrison for a while, because I need to come back to myself.
Pause.
Yeah, pause. Put a pause on it. I've been preparing myself because I couldn't wait to. I knew there would be podcasts like this, which are fantastic. This is really great. And these podcasts and talking to people, I'm just learning more. Like, we're all just learning more. It's another act of co-creation. This part of it is exciting.
Yeah, and it's the people, right? Like, everyone that's here, that's contributing their energy, that's asking the questions and commenting and supporting. And it flips it over and gives us different perspectives, because each person is bringing their own awareness and traumas and healing, and we're all coming at it from different places, right?
Yes, and yes, exactly. And the Doors is all about this. The Doors is healing stuff, right? So like I said, I was very mindful of the person I was writing about, knowing that so many people like him for the same reasons that I do. And I just wanted to write a book that was clear, fun, and interesting, that just really makes the case that he's a secret teacher and one of the great ones in the Western esoteric tradition. Because these type of people only come along every 150 years. I mean, I love rock music. I'm a rock musician. I'm a singer-songwriter and all that kind of stuff. Like, I love Van Halen, and I love, all things that go on here in Los Angeles and everything like that, and classic rock and all that. And Jim Morrison, he was all that too. Like, he had the physical stamina, he had the looks, he had the attitude. He had, like, the balls out, way of thinking, the extreme attitude you need to make all that work. But with Jim Morrison, you're getting all this other fantastic stuff that is all about the Western esoteric tradition and poetry and film and all these things. And it all comes together to this whole energetic thing that transcends time. Like, we're still talking about him. We're going to be talking about him in 100 years. Like, he's that kind of person. Like, he really makes an impression on people's lives when they discover him.
Yeah.
So when I discovered,
Which is a good teacher.
Right, exactly. And when I discovered No One Here Gets Out Alive, the biography written in 1980, when I was 13 years old, I was riveted and I loved it. And it's my deep hope that, a new generation of people, of young kids who love rock music, they find my book and I can give something back for what Jim Morrison did for me growing up and what he's done for a lot of people,
Yeah.
This is all about service. Jim Morrison was all about, this is someone who really wanted to give.
And I talk about this all the time, right? Like, our purpose is sharing the gift of who we are unconditionally with the world around us. And we're learning about all of our gifts when we go within and do our healing, when we have that accountability and do the shadow work and the uncomfortableness of it. And then we're sharing from our heart space with the world around us. Heidi is sharing Friday Night and Crimes on the Rise. My granddaughter will say that. That amazing live circle of energies, open-minded people are priceless. I know, Deb. Yes, yes, yes to service, being of service. Tanya, thank you for making it. Late or not, appreciate that you are here. She's just saying it's an intriguing conversation. And James is asking when you will give birth to the next book. Will there be a book 2 or a follow-up?
That's interesting. I've thought about this. I've thought about, so as Jim Morrison is Dionysius in the Dionysian. I love the rock band Rush. And
yes.
I've seen Rush like 5 times, and Neil Peart writes all of the songs for Rush, and he's a mystic too. Mm-hmm. And he represents like that. There's the Dionysian, but then there's the Apollonian energy, with his drum kit and like the way he moves Rush forward like a chariot, right? And with his songs like mystic rhythms and many songs like that. This was a deeply spiritual person as well, whom I really love. I've had a great experience. My first time seeing Rush, I actually stood behind Neil Peart for the entire concert when they were kicking off a tour in Greenville, really? South Carolina, which is a real treat. I'm blessed with like really amazing rock and roll experiences. I'm really blessed this way. So I've thought about writing a book that shows that Neil Peart also has that secret teacher soul in him as well, that he was expressing through music, but very differently. It's very much Apollonian, whereas Jim Morrison is very much Dionysian. So that's a future project, perhaps.
When you have moved through this energy, and again, if you're trusting that the universe lays everything out at the exact time, the divine time and divine process, it doesn't need you don't have to push for it. It just seems to start falling into place, and then it's the right time and energy. I have a very strong connection to Rush. So do my kiddos, but. Love Rush 2. Tanya is just sharing, I feel that way about Robert Plant, about his music.
Yeah, Robert Plant he's from Wales. He has a very mystical side. I actually met him at the Whole Foods in Austin once. He's very tall, very nice guy.
What is very tall? Like, I'm only 5. Well, I'm shrinking because I'm at the age where shrinking
He was
begins.
about 6'6", 6'7".
Oh, good Lord, that's very tall. I feel anybody over 5'10" is tall. And as far as females, my daughter made it to 5'6", and I think she's glorious. Like at
It was
5'6".
crazy. He started singing Achilles' Last Stand right there in the checkout line at the Whole Foods in Austin.
Really, eh?
The whole grocery store went nuts. I've never seen anything like that in my life. He's the nicest guy. He strikes me as someone who's absolutely blown away that this has happened to him. You know that.
Oh, the humbleness of it.
Yeah, exactly. Well, I mean, Jimmy Page he's a Thelemite. Like, he was very deep
Yeah.
into magic. Like he once said that, he didn't practice magic, he became magic. Led Zeppelin's a
Mm.
very magical thing.
Everyone is all commenting about Rush, so that maybe there's some of your like
Oh yeah, let's talk about
seeds
that
are
for a second.
planted, right?
Mhm.
Emery, thank you for being here. Kudos, Paul. Looking forward to receiving your book on Tuesday.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Just reminding everybody, Amazon, on through your website as well too.
Yes,
Right?
paulwyld.com. Yep.
Paul Wyld.
It seems like it's going to be available. Like, I don't know if they have Barnes and Noble in Canada. It's the big
Chapters
chain here.
Indigo.
Okay, yeah, it's going to be available in all those stores in Canada.
Yeah.
All these wonderful people, these great questions. This is fantastic.
It's so good. Thank you. Thank you so much. And we're doing pretty good. I mean, the dogs fell back asleep. All the background noise is
The sirens around here at traffic time in LA, like, it's been pretty good too. So
yeah.
the gods are with us.
Jim Morrison is making it flow with ease, right? I truly believe that's a big part of it. Like when we get pulled to something, maybe there's more of a connection. If we go even bigger, is there an alternate dimension of reality where you are in sync with Jim Morrison and having that connection in that reality? And so in this lifetime, it's coming out, through the book in this lifetime. I don't know. I like exploring those possibilities and concepts too, right? When we have a really strong connection, how deep does that connection go? And did we have a past lifetime or an alternate dimension, alternate reality connection to them as well too?
Yes. I mean, I don't like, talking about myself, but it's kind of difficult, like, not to with Jim Morrison. I mean, I was born at I was just a mile away from the Dade County Courthouse in Miami in October 1970, and that was right when the trial was going on, when they were falsely convicting him.
Wow.
And then, as I wrote in the introduction, I went through a tough divorce, and I was at a children's home in Florida, and my counselor told me, like, hey, I went to school with Jim Morrison, after I told him how much I loved the Doors, and so I've kept experiencing these close connections that, throughout my life, and then things just kind of culminated here in Los Angeles over the past 8 years of where I was,
Right.
and it was just time to go down that road. So, I mean, I really, like, questioned myself and, like, made sure, like, hey, is this real? Is this really in the right direction?
So is that just a layer of personal healing too, like where you're not gaslighting yourself?
Yes, exactly.
Right.
Yeah, not gaslighting yourself. Something I think we all need to learn, right?
Yes, I agree. And the part of that awareness is understanding that we will continuously get triggered. It's how long we sit in it.
Right.
That,
Right.
Shows us how much healing we've done. Thank you, Heidi. Loving this and intriguing. Definitely checking out the book. That is fabulous. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
We are highly encouraging everyone to support our authors and buy the book. Buy the books.
I see a question there.
Do you see any other artists reaching out to us like Jim has?
I think Kurt Cobain is a really great example. Kurt Cobain, his attitude was the same as Jim Morrison's, like, who needs action when you got words, with the lyrics in his songs. Kurt Cobain was someone who was very much in touch with his emotions.
Kurt Cobain comes through in seances for me a lot. When I host seances, Kurt Cobain comes through, and I am like a mom from, like, Northern Ontario. I don't understand the why, but we're going to roll with it. Yeah, I would agree. Kurt Cobain for sure.
I mean, a lot of the grunge singers, Eddie Vedder and unfortunately the late, Lane Staley, Chris Cornell really loved him a lot because
Yeah.
Jim Morrison teaches you how to get in touch with your pain, because your pain is where you're going to find your authenticity. Your pain, Jim Morrison said, pain is like you carry it on your shoulder like a radio. It's going to put you in touch with who you are. It's painful, but it's the realest thing that's going on in your life because it hurts, and it's very real. Like you can't fake that part, when you're going on in your life. That's a very like important thing to know as an artist, and the lead singers in the grunge movement, they love Jim Morrison for that, for sure. I think it's getting a little bit harder in this day and age to see what artist out there in the culture is. I'm certain that they exist, but the music industry has changed greatly since Jim Morrison's time. Like Joni Mitchell, the Canadian singer-songwriter, said that she was in a couple of years ago that she was at a party, and she was overhearing some A&R people talk, and they're saying, we're not looking for talent anymore so much as a particular look and a cooperative attitude, because it's all about selling. Whereas back then it was all about music producers who were just wanting to discover artists who their art was fantastic and it could affect a change in consciousness. Now it's a business, it's very corporate, So as far as art, I mean, they're out there today. Certainly, like in indie rock, like Alison Mosshart, the lead singer of the Kills, who I really like a lot. She loves Jim Morrison.
Yeah.
Amanda people Palmer. Like that.
She's Amanda very Palmer. Real.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
I think Karen O, the lead singer of the Yeah Yeah Yeahs, she definitely has a gut level style of singing too that reminds me very much of Jim Morrison.
Michelle is, everyone's adding in. Michelle is, I don't know how to, Rage V? Am I doing that correctly? Rage Against the Machine. Thank you.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yes. I say Trent Reznor too from Nine Inch Nails as well.
Ren from UK is incredible, very connected to spirit as well. Tanya is sharing, he really touched a lot of teens deeply back in the day. His death was devastating to some young folks I work with. She does work in high schools.
This is in reference to Kurt Cobain?
I'm not sure, Tanya, are we, yes, Kurt Cobain, are we talking about, just want to double check. Heidi's sharing, agree 100%. Triggers are for evaluation and analyzing the healing. Deb is sharing, perhaps you've met Henry Diltz, who photographed everyone from that musical era. He has stories.
Yeah, Henry Diltz is fantastic. I've missed him a couple of times around Los Angeles. But he's a figure around here.
Deborah, if you have an in with your lovely connections that you have, maybe there's a connection that can happen. Maybe.
Yeah, that'd be great.
Yes, Tanya's saying Kurt Cobain. Can you let people know, just because we are needing to be mindful of the time and sort of wrap up where we're at, let everybody know about your release party on Tuesday.
Yes, it's going to be at Book Soup, which is on Sunset Boulevard in West Hollywood. And that's going to be at 7 o'clock here in Los Angeles. And it's going to be on Tuesday on September 10th. That's where we're having the release. And it's going to be for an hour from 7 to 8 o'clock. And then on October 1st at Stories Books and Cafe, which is in Echo Park in Los Angeles, at 7 o'clock, I'm going to have another discussion book signing there. It's going to go on for about an hour.
Oh, that's brilliant. Deborah Morse has been my friend. We met through a spiritual forum, like, I don't even, 17 years ago, maybe. And we've only had the opportunity to meet in person once, but she has always been that connection for my children. When there's a book release and signing, she stands in a line and ships it to Canada for us. She's just been so brilliant. She's been so brilliant for us that way. I wish you so much success. It's so brilliant.
Thank you.
I hope this has been a positive experience, and would love to have you back any time that you feel inspired to. We are just reminding everybody it's paulwyld.com. I try to encourage people to purchase books from the person directly if you can get it through the website or through Inner Traditions, who are your publishers as well too, right?
Yeah, Inner Traditions is a publisher. It's distributed by Simon Schuster. It opens in September 10th around the U.S. and then October 24th in the United Kingdom, and then November 13th in Australia. But you can purchase the book through your favorite media outlet.
Yeah, and for some people that are like in the northern communities, Amazon is the only what you got to do in order to get things when you are remote. So, Deb is sharing. I'll tell my LA friends about the Book Soup event.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Mark Eddy, excellent book.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
So thank you everybody for being here. Thank you so much, Paul Wyld. If you like what we've got to offer next Friday, we have the Animal Communication Collective. Julie Hurt, Meredith Tollison, and Karen Dendy Smith. Talking about our connection and our connection to our animals. They will be doing live readings for us as well too. So bring your questions, comments, pets, both living and crossed. They will help connect us. So thank you so much, everybody, for being here. You have been listening to Spirit Switchboard. I'm your host, Kerrilynn Shellhorn, and we have been live on the United Public Radio Network and the UFO Paranormal Radio Network, 105.3 and 107.7 FM out of New Orleans. Thanks, everybody. See you next week.